Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into a fascinating but often overlooked aspect of Brexit negotiations, that's Gibraltar. As reported in the media recently, there's been what's called important progress made in the latest talks between Britain, Spain and the European Union regarding Gibraltar's post-Brexit future. But what exactly does this progress mean and why are these talks necessary in the first place? That's what we're going to explore in today's video. First off, let's get the basics down. Gibraltar is a tiny British overseas territory located on the southern tip of Spain. It's home to about 34,000 people and historically has been a point of contention between the UK and Spain. But the real challenge came after Brexit, when Gibraltar suddenly found itself in a very precarious position. You see, unlike mainland Britain, Gibraltar shares a land border with the EU, in this case with Spain. And this means that the impact of Brexit on Gibraltar is particularly unique. While the UK is separated by the English Channel, Gibraltar physically touches EU soil. So after Brexit, how do you handle movement across that border? And that's the big question. Now let's jump into the latest round of talks. Representatives from Britain, Spain and the EU and Gibraltar met again last week in Brussels. And while they didn't reach a final agreement, they did say that significant progress has been made on practical matters, particularly when it comes to the free movement of people and goods. And this is a huge issue because without a deal, Gibraltar would essentially face the same restrictions as the UK post-Brexit, and this could really harm both Gibraltar and the surrounding areas in Spain. So what does important progress really mean here? Well, according to Spain's Foreign Minister José Manuel Álvarez, the talks moved forward on a lot of technical and practical details. In his words, there's still more work to do, but they are hopeful that an agreement can be reached soon. And that's significant because without a deal, the border between Gibraltar and Spain could become a hard border, which would cause a ton of problems for both sides. But why are these talks even happening in the first place? Well, it's not just about geography, although that's a big part of it. Gibraltar's economy is deeply interconnected with Spain's. Every day, thousands of people cross the border from Spain into Gibraltar for work, and a large portion of Gibraltar's goods come through Spain. If the free movement of people and goods were to stop, it would create serious disruptions, not just for Gibraltar, but for the entire region on both sides of the border. And this is why the negotiations have been so focused on keeping that flow intact. Both Spain and Gibraltar rely on it for economic stability, but it's also about something more fundamental: sovereignty. You know that word. Both Spain and the UK want to maintain their claims and control over Gibraltar, and these talks are walking a fine line between those two national interests. And one of the biggest sticking points in these negotiations has been the role of Spanish border police. There's been some talk that, under a potential deal, Spanish authorities could be stationed at Gibraltar's airport and port. And this is where things get really tricky. For Gibraltar, that idea raises serious concerns about sovereignty. After all, having Spanish border police operating within Gibraltar's territory could be seen as a step towards Spanish control, something the people of Gibraltar strongly oppose. The last thing they want is to feel like they're being handed over to Spain as part of a post-Brexit compromise. And that's not an unfounded fear. Gibraltar has held multiple referendums in the past, and the people have overwhelmingly voted to remain under British sovereignty. In fact, in the 2002 referendum, a whopping 98% of Gibraltarians rejected the idea of shared sovereignty between the UK and Spain. So when we talk about the possibility of Spanish police working inside Gibraltar's airports and port, you can see why that could set off alarm bells for a lot of people. At the same time, Spain has its own concerns. Spain wants to make sure that Gibraltar doesn't become some kind of backdoor into the EU where people or goods could enter without proper checks. And they want to ensure that any agreement protects the integrity of the EU's borders, while also safeguarding the interests of the region in Spain that borders Gibraltar, known as the Campo de Gibraltar. So these negotiations are not just about Gibraltar itself, they are also about the wider region. The border towns in Spain, especially La Linea de la Concepción, are economically reliant on Gibraltar. Many people living there cross into Gibraltar daily for work, and any disruption to the border would have serious economic consequences for both sides. No one wants to see a hard border that makes it difficult for people and goods to move freely. But it's not just about the economic impact. There are political implications here too. If no deal is reached, the border between Gibraltar and Spain could become a focal point for tensions between the UK and the EU. In a post-Brexit world, both sides are trying to avoid unnecessary friction, and Gibraltar is one of the last unresolved issues standing in the way of a smoother relationship. Now, this latest meeting was notable for a couple of reasons. First, it was the first time that David Lammy, the new British Foreign Secretary, took part in the negotiations. Lammy, a Labour MP, is part of a new government that is trying to re-establish Britain's relationship with the EU after the turbulence of the past few years. And his involvement signals that the UK is serious about getting this deal done and finding a solution that works for everyone involved. Also in the talks were Maroš Šefčovič, the Vice President of the European Commission, and Fabian Picardo, Gibraltar's Chief Minister. It's important to note that Gibraltar has its own voice in these negotiations, and Picardo has been very clear about Gibraltar's stance. They want a deal that maintains their British identity while allowing for smooth movement across the border. And Picardo has said in the past that the people of Gibraltar won't accept any agreements that threatens their sovereignty or makes them feel like they are being pushed towards Spain. Now, while progress has been made, we still don't have a deal. But the fact that the talks have been described as productive and constructive is a good sign. The technical details that are being worked out now are crucial to make this deal a reality. And the goal is to reach an agreement that ensures confidence, legal certainty, and stability for the people of the region, both in Gibraltar and the neighboring parts of Spain. But let's be clear, these talks are necessary because Brexit changed the game for Gibraltar. Before Brexit, Gibraltar was part of the EU along with the UK, so the movement of people and goods was relatively straightforward. But now that the UK is out of the EU, Gibraltar is caught in a grey zone. It's British, but it's physically connected to the EU. And they voted against Brexit, by the way. And that's why these negotiations are so complex. Both sides need to find a solution that respects the fact that Gibraltar is British while also addressing the reality of its location within Europe. And if no deal is reached, Gibraltar will face the same post-Brexit conditions as the rest of the UK except Northern Ireland. And that means customs checks, restrictions on movement, and a potential hardening of the border with Spain. And that's something both sides want to avoid, not just for economic reasons, but for political stability as well. So what happens next? Well, the talks will continue, and in the coming weeks, we'll likely hear more about those technical and practical aspects that are being ironed out. The key issue is whether the UK, Spain, and the EU can come to a compromise that works for everyone, including the people of Gibraltar. And that's going to require some flexibility on all sides, but there's a sense of optimism coming out of these latest talks that a deal is within reach. In the end, Gibraltar is a prime example of how Brexit is still shaping political and economic realities, even years after the UK's formal exit from the EU. It highlights the complexity of borders, sovereignty, and identity in a post-Brexit world, and why it's so important for all parties involved to get this right. For the people living in Gibraltar and the surrounding areas of Spain, these talks are not just political theatre. They're about their daily lives, their jobs, and their future. So, what do you think? Is a deal on Gibraltar essential for post-Brexit stability, or do you think there's too much focus on this tiny territory in this grand scheme of things? So let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and thanks for watching. And as always, if you found this video informative, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you next time. The next video is right here in the end screen.